Welcome everyone to the Nerd Journey Podcast, episode number 196. We're joining you every week to talk IT career progression and bring you the advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers. I'm your host, Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_ on Twitter, joined by my co-host, John White, at VJourneyman. Hey John, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Nick. Just want to remind everybody that we are both pre-sales technical engineers with backgrounds in IT operations. We hope our career discussions will be vendor neutral, relevant across disciplines, and remain timeless. If you're enjoying our content, please drop us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to be listening. And if you want to get in touch with us, tweet or DM at Nerd Journey. Ultimately, we're just two nerds on a journey.
A journey to career enlightenment.
So let's take a trip.
Fantastic. I just want to remind everybody that the Nerd Journey Knowledge Graph is now live. We've mentioned it a couple of times. Surf out to graph.nerd-journey.com for a more connected, searchable platform to mine the show notes and find interesting topics and trends that you might not have otherwise realized were there. This week is part 2 of our interview with David Babbitt. Oh yeah, it's gonna be a trilogy. I like trilogies. How about you, John?
All the best ones are trilogies.
Yeah. If you missed part 1 of the trilogy, let's review very quickly episode 195. David Babbitt studied software development in college, somewhat influenced by his father's decision to switch careers. He worked for a large company as a developer, and he chose to move to startups to make a bigger impact. And in that episode, we did some really interesting, I guess what I'll call myth debunking of what it's like to work at a startup compared to other companies and the risks involved. But in part 2, the conversation goes in a different direction. What do we have on tap, John?
Yeah, that's right. I think some interesting things to listen out for is David's move to product management from pure developer work. And then especially in that role, influencing the developers without actually having managerial power over them. And then also that relationship with the engineering manager, who is a peer of the product manager, who actually exerts managerial power over the development team. Found that to be fascinating.
Yeah, I would listen for the discussion of player coach right off the bat. What's it like to be a player, someone who executes and does things for the team, but also has to coach the team members?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Very awkward position or interesting position or powerful position, depending on your viewpoint. I think lastly, there is a discussion about some of the language and I would say jargon that product management and developers use that I kind of knew what these words meant, but didn't have like a really strong grounding in the definitions. And we really got, I think, properly schooled on what some of those things meant. But why don't we get directly into part 2 of our discussion with David Babbitt in episode 196.
How many people were you coaching? Because you said you were a player coach on that, on teams at Spiceworks. How big was that impact past just I'm a software developer?
Good question. So, I mean, it changed over time. So when I first took on the role, it was probably a 10. It was like half of engineering, I guess. Later on, as we started to separate the teams into kind of the products, if you will, then I took on a product and then later on created a new product. And so those teams were probably, or a couple of new products, and those teams were smaller. So like 5 to 8 per team.
That feels like a good size. You start to get to like 10 or 12 and it's like, ooh, your player days are over. You're just coaching at that point.
Totally agree. I mean, I think also, again, this kind of goes back to the whole point of like startups and how mature are they in different roles. As an early manager in a company that, just made me a manager that hadn't made other lead engineers managers before. Like, did I really like respect the role or invest in the role of being a manager as much as I should have? No, I don't think so. Like doing one-on-ones on a constant basis, giving feedback on a constant basis, trying to actually develop these engineers. I mean, a lot of my focus was the product and getting the product out and on time. And so there was some amount of mentorship as just sort of like a technical lead, but I wouldn't say like as a manager I was doing the best job. To be fair, like people have told me I was a decent manager, but I don't. Yeah, maybe I'm too self-critical, but I felt like I could have done a lot better.
That's 20/20 hindsight, right? You
totally
later on realize the skills that you should have had or the actions you should have taken.
When you went to college, you shouldn't have cut so many classes. Boy, I regret that one too.
Same thing. Exactly the same thing. You know,
totally.
Like, if I had to do this all over again, I'd be so much better at it. Yeah, you and everybody else, right?
Yeah, totally.
So did you stay a manager? I noticed on your LinkedIn that you actually had a director title at one point.
Yeah, so it's been all over the place. To be honest, it's so at Spiceworks, what happened was like I said earlier. So we were kind of player coach dev managers, if you will. We didn't have product managers in the first kind of go around that they created management. And the thinking there was like we wanted everybody to feel close to our users. We wanted everybody to sort of empathize with the problem, and we didn't want like somebody whose responsibility it was to do that, and then everybody else was just like an engineer. But then later on, as we grew, it became more obvious that we needed to have some people that were more focused on the execution, like getting the product out the door, and other people who were just more focused on, what is the problem that we're going to need to solve here. And so I took the product manager path, and then near the end at Spiceworks, I was my title is executive director. So I was promoted. I was managing PMs and I was managing dev managers and designers and analysts. And so I would think of it sort of like a GM, but I didn't really have like a budget of my own. In more relatable titles, it might be like a director of product management or something. That's probably a more relatable title than executive director.
You weren't responsible for profit and loss on an entire product.
And I didn't have marketing. Like I couldn't hire for my own organization. Like I could go and ask for headcount, but it was, it wasn't quite that aligned under me. Like I couldn't go and say, this is the budget that I need or whatever.
Everybody always has to ask for headcount. It's just who you're asking.
For sure.
Was this for the new product you mentioned you went after or created? Weave that in for us.
It was really for multiple products in the end, I think, if memory serves me right. So second product that I managed at Spiceworks was a network monitoring product. So we created that one from the back of a napkin. So like recognizing there was a huge gap in the products that we had that were servicing this problem in the market. A lot of users were coming to us, looking for network monitoring. And we just had this inventory tool that was sort of passing off as a network monitoring tool. And so I got to create that product. So I got to pick my team from everybody else and then turn that into a product. But I was just like the leader of that product. It was just a single manager. Then after that was when they made me and Kevin also directors. And that became my products. Oh man, I'm trying to remember. I think what I was director over was we started to create essentially like an app store concept. So we were creating a marketplace inside of Spiceworks to create extensions for the inventory help desk and network monitoring product. And I think I was mostly over that. I honestly don't remember if I was also over inventory and help desk at the time. Maybe I was. How poor my memory's gotten. But I wasn't directly over product anymore. Like no one product and its future. Like I had PMs and engineering managers that were reporting to me.
Can you maybe take the time to define what a product manager actually does? We asked this definition of what a software developer versus software engineer is, but maybe there's people out there that don't have a clear vision of what a product manager is.
Couple of ways you can think about this, and maybe even a few ways. So this is where there's a lot of confusion around product management because I don't think that there are really a lot of hard and fast rules. So one thing I think that I've seen in the industry, and I haven't done a ton of research around different titles of different companies and stuff like that, but for sure, one way to look at it is like what you typically see is there's like a product manager and a technical product manager. I said it at the onset, I'm a product manager technical, I'm a technical product manager. I've seen those two titles in many places. I don't think that it doesn't necessarily mean that any one company has like both of these titles. I'll just say that as well. What I've seen is for both of them, like our responsibility, and we'll get to sort of like the day to day, but like our responsibility is the future of this product in this market and making sure that, this product is successful. And so the future of the market, you can take that in lots of different ways, and we can talk about that as well, but it's basically like your responsibility is the success of this product in the future of the market. When you kind of look at that from like the product manager versus the technical product manager lens, product managers, the easy way to sort of categorize them, that they're more focused on like the business side of it, if you will, right? So partnerships, pricing, packaging, maybe the bigger sort of like economic concerns in the future of the market and stuff like that. What I've seen for technical product managers, like the really easy way to think about them is like they're probably the product manager is more closely aligned with engineering. They go to ceremonies. Sometimes they're also called product owners, depending on the company again. But they're working on the design. They're working on like tough technology choices, thinking about the future of technology in the market, translating some of the business problems to actionable stories for an engineering team. So I think of those two kind of big buckets. That's one way to look at it. Like another way to look at it, I've heard, you typically will hear that like a product manager is the CEO of their product. I don't actually love that term because product managers don't manage people like we manage a product. We have to influence everybody else. So like if I was the CEO of my product, I would have the engineering team report to me or the marketing team, report to me, et cetera. But that's not how it works in any company. And product managers typically don't manage anybody. They just influence others and try to get sort of alignment in these directions that are the right direction for this product. Another one that I love as an example of like the definition of product management is you're sort of like a friend uses this, the sort of like the ooze that fills in the gaps in the organization. I think that you see this a lot in startups. So your responsibility is, again, for like the future of the product being successful in the market. But in order to ensure that future, like you end up like putting on lots of hats and filling in lots of roles. And so if your company is not great at, your startup is not great at sales enablement or at, product marketing or PR, like you'll end up wearing all these different hats somehow and helping out. So I think that's part of it. Another way you can think about like PM is sort of like, what is the responsibility? Like, what do you have to do day to day, week to week? So I already mentioned, like, you don't lead people directly. I mean, you influence them. It's sort of a fine line too, though. Like I'm paired with an engineering team. I've always basically been paired with engineering teams at different companies. So it's, they know that you're their PM. And so like, yeah, they don't report to me, but they know that they're doing the stuff that I want this product, the direction for this product. It's not exactly like they report to me, but they are essentially under my influence.
Does that mean, sorry to interrupt you there.
No, go for it.
Does that mean you have, that's based on a strong relationship between you and the engineering manager?
And the engineering team. I mean, I think that I've been lucky in this way too, that I have heard of, and I've never personally felt this, I've heard of sort of like antagonistic relationships between like PMs and their engineering teams. And I don't think that I've ever really felt that. So a lot of times when I'm saying this is what we need to do, and this is how we think about it, and this is the direction that we're going, sometimes it might be met with sort of initial confusion, but ultimately, you win them over, they start to believe in you as you show more success and stuff like that. But I have heard of sort of like pretty dysfunctional organizations where the PM wants to do something, but then engineering wants to do something completely different. And I've been lucky to where I've never been in that situation. In my experience, when I'm saying this is the set of stories that we're working on next, or this is what we're doing for the next quarter or 6 months, like it's been generally well received and understood.
I want to come back to the stories, but I also want to ask about that tension. You are responsible for helping to deliver this thing, but you have only influence over the people that are actually doing it, as opposed to, say, an engineering manager who can hire or fire these people and say, you're not pulling your weight. I need to put you on a performance improvement plan. You have problems interacting with the people that, are important to interact with, and you need to work on that. And that's something that I'm going to be measuring you on. You don't have any of that as a PM directly, yet you are leaning on, one or two or more teams to deliver the success on the product. And that feels like a fundamental tension. Is that something that I'm right about, or am I just way off base about?
I'm trying to see if it's like, I'm trying to think to stories of other PMs in other organizations to say, do I necessarily think that that's a problem in general, or is it just like a problem and a problem that I haven't experienced or anything like that? Yeah, I'm not like, my job has nothing to do with hiring and firing.
Is it almost like you have like an operations, like right-hand person to handle the day-to-day operations of the team?
Oh, yeah, no, there's a dev manager.
Right. But what I'm saying is that's a role that's abstracted away from you personally as having that responsibility on top of all the other responsibilities that you have. And is that why it is typically structured that way? So you don't need to worry about managing the people. You can just manage the product.
I guess maybe I've been in this role so long that I I don't even think of them as related. They're almost like so orthogonal to me. I'm not also managing necessarily the complexity of how they solve the problem. Like my responsibility is really like, what's the next problem to solve? My responsibility is understanding, in order for this product to be successful in the market next year, what are the challenges that we're going to face, the headwinds, the tailwinds, the economics of it all, the user base shifting, adjacent markets, all these sorts of things. Thinking about that, like where do we need to be positioned? What important features, what problems do we need to have solved by the product in that time frame? What order do we need to do them in? Like these are all the things that we think about. But how they actually solve the problem that I'm giving them to solve next is that's the engineering's responsibility. Are they capable? Are they firing on all cylinders? Do they need to hire more? Do they need to fire? Like that's the engineering manager's responsibility. I think where it starts to get a little confusing is like when we talk about like technical product management, and in technical product management, sometimes you are asked to answer questions that are or help out with making technical trade-offs. And so some of those technical trade-offs might be like, are we over solving this problem or under solving this problem based on what you think is coming in the market later on? Like might be one technical trade-off. Another one might be just like, frameworks, and like, is this worth the investment to shift from this framework to that framework? Sometimes you get involved in those conversations, which to me feels a little bit more engineering manager than PM, but I could see it being different at different companies.
And are you keeping a tight cadence with the engineering manager specifically so that you have a good relationship and they know where your mind is so that they can kind of help guide the ship too?
Yeah, I think this varies by PM, and maybe it also varies by like, do you consider yourself sort of like the product owner / technical product manager versus are you more like what I call like sort of the more business product manager? I go to all the ceremonies. So if you're familiar with sort of like any agile way of development, but typically Scrum, you've got like a product owner that is representing the set of stories and what we need to do next, and what does it look like as an acceptable solution for this story. Like I'm involved in all of that, and that is because I have like a history of being an engineer, and I like to be in those levels, that level of detail. I do think that there's a lot of that for me. Again, maybe to a fault, like maybe I shouldn't be this involved, and maybe it does take more time than it should. But I enjoy it, and it's part of my kind of sort of happiness or work or whatever. And so if I was too far away, I think this kind of goes back to the director role, and then stepping away from that role over time. Like I found myself too far away from the engineering team and kind of the week to week of the engineering team and what they were building. And it wasn't like I needed to be in there solving the technical problems or working with them to answer these technical choices. For me, it was all about the creativity of the solution for the customer. Like, we've got a problem to solve. How do we solve it? Let's be creative. What's a good solution? Like, I just liked being close to like the creativity of it all. And so that's also why I'm probably kind of week to week with the engineering team. So I would say, to answer your question quickly, like, yes, I'm like super in lockstep with my engineering team.
Do you mind if I ask how much time product managers, technical product managers spend in conversations with customers versus with other internal, like field-facing teams, engineering, and others at their company?
Certainly, you can ask. I think I've seen it vary by company. Brand new at Amazon, I can't really speak to like the what's the right balance at Amazon yet. So we'll skip over them, and I'll just like talk about previous roles. At Ping, so my last job, I was working at a company called Ping Identity. We're a security software space. Our customers are all name brand, bank, healthcare companies, et cetera, all the big brands that you're probably well aware of. I didn't really get to interact with my sort of like the hands-on keyboard sort of user. I didn't get to interact with them all that often. Sometimes you did. A lot of times you were just sort of like dealing with like the director, some sort of like director title inside of security and stuff like that. But from that, and often, so to answer your question, like hours a week easily. And I think that that's important. Like, your responsibility is to bring back this information from the market, from the problems that we're solving, to the engineering org in order to ensure the success of the product. So we would hear from like our customers, like what are on their roadmaps at Ping, like what are they trying to solve in the security space over the next year? How can we align with that? Make sure that we're well positioned for where they need to be this year, next year. So you'd hear things like, going back to the conversation of DevOps way earlier, like you'd hear that they're finally going to start automating more, and they're very interested in like containerizing. And so we would make sure that our software at the time was positioned to be run inside of Docker containers and stuff like that. So there was like a lot of that kind of feedback. But I would say you should definitely dedicate. Easily hours a week would be good. It never got to that point, on a regular cadence level, because you find yourself doing lots of other responsibilities that probably you shouldn't be doing. as a PM, kind of goes back to the whole ooze comment. Like you might be filling in gaps elsewhere in the organization, and you find yourself like that probably is not the best investment of time, but somebody has to do the job. And that would take away from probably like the right amount of user research and product research that I think is important. I think you end up having to rely more often than I'm comfortable doing in sometimes like on this internalizing. I would say you have to always have to, like, as a PM, you always have to like empathize with the problem that you're solving for your customers or your users. Like what are their challenges, that they face on a day in, day out basis, or on a more macro basis than that, and really internalize those, because you can't make everything a research project, if you know what I mean. Like you can't go off like, oh, I've got this problem to solve, let me go and talk to 20 users and find out, if should it be this way or that way. You've got to sometimes just go on the empathy that you've built and internalizing this empathy that you've developed over time.
Suddenly, a lot of the questions that product managers would ask at executive briefings makes a lot more sense to me.
Yeah.
But I have to imagine that executive briefings aren't the main time and place that you're asking these types of questions.
No, but it's a really astute point. Like I would use it as my opportunity sometimes, because this is maybe a reflection on my personality a little bit. Like, I recognize that the company needed me to be doing executive briefings, or what I would call a lot of outbound stuff that I don't think is necessarily the responsibility of the PM. But if I'm going to be in front of a customer and I'm going to be sort of talking about our roadmap and presenting, I can't remember other stuff that we would present in executive briefings. A lot of times we were talking about the roadmap. I would stop and ask questions and say, what do you think of this, or of these three things, what was the most important? Which would you choose to drop, and stuff like that, just to try and make it somewhat the other direction, not just kind of me talking at them for an hour. And I don't know if that was, I think it probably made some other people in the room uncomfortable that I would do it that way. But hey, I was there to learn.
No, that happened in every single executive briefing that I was ever at with a PM.
Good.
So I think that must be a very, very typical thing.
I just want to make one comment real quick, David. So my observation is that this shift from executive director back to product manager got you a little bit closer to the customer interactions you were getting when you used to go out and be part of the Spiceworks user groups, because that's where we met. And I remember you coming to the group, here's what I'm working on, give me some feedback, what do y'all think? Was the absence of the customer interaction maybe that in that high-level executive director role what drew you more to product management, in addition to the I want to make more of a difference and be closer to the engineering?
I would say it's not so much probably like making more of a difference. I mean, when you think about somebody's responsibility as a director and their influence over a larger organization, that's definitely more making kind of an impact on the company. I would say for me, it was as soon as I became a director, and this has now happened twice. So I became a director at Ping too. So again, this actually goes back to the like kind of to a fault. I'll do what the company needs. And both times I was like presented with this opportunity to become a director, and the first time I was like, yeah, sure, I'll try it out. Second time I went into it like eyes wide open. I said, well, I've seen this movie play before and I'll tell you how it ends. So I'll do it because that's what the company needs, but just recognize I'm probably not going to do it for that long. But both times like got too far removed from the creativity, I think is the easiest way to characterize it. So, a lot of your job becomes more about, managing others, obviously, about reporting on status, if you will, kind of reporting up, managing up, measuring progress, measuring against goals. Like all these things are super critical. I'm not saying that they're not. There just weren't things that super excite me. And I think also like I could have a balance of that if I'm doing half of that with the other half of my responsibility being working with the product, engineers, working directly with the designers and the customers to really solve problems and be creative about solving customers' problems. Then I would still be happy. But what I found in both director roles was just I was too far removed from it, and then I just didn't enjoy it as much. And I think that's fair. Like it's you shouldn't be pushed into these roles and then like be stuck there. Like it's okay to take a step back down. And I did it twice.
Yeah, it's important to recognize what I think takes away energy from you in your work life and what gives you energy. And if the main responsibilities of a role take away your energy and make you unhappy, then that's a good sign that you should not do it. And there also should not be a problem with going, hey, I filled in on this for the organization, but really this is not what I want to do. And I want to go back to, something similar to what I was doing.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of also think like takeaway energy is maybe a little bit strong. Like for me, it just,
Not exciting.
to be fair, I was just not good at it either because I didn't want to put the level of effort into it that was necessary to be good at it, because it just wasn't something that totally excited me, to your point, right? And so for me, it's like I get excited with like interacting with, like Nick was mentioning earlier, like going out, interacting with users, understanding the problem, thinking creatively with engineers to solve the problem. And as a director, I just didn't experience that, and I just didn't put the effort into like being a good director. I'll be honest, and both of my bosses will 100% agree with me that I did not do it.
I don't know. I guess that's what I mean by giving you energy or taking away energy. It's I enjoy this to the point where I will independently raise my level of effort because I get joy out of it, as opposed to, that actually just makes me sad, or that's not appealing, right?
Yeah, fair.
I did want to circle back and ask about a couple things, just because we have you here and we get to talk to somebody who has experienced this, in the development side, and then, talking about this from the product management side. And that is this idea of user stories. And then you also mentioned like agile ceremonies, which is a little bit more on the development side. But if you could kind of talk about those two things, because I think a lot of people on the operations side have no idea what those things are.
Oh, wow. Okay. Let me think about this one.
It doesn't have to be like a ground up like definition, like academic, but maybe your experience, and how to, if I said, hey, that's industry jargon, can you explain that to me? How would you explain it?
Yeah. Are these like short stories about the end users or novels? Comic books? It's not clear to me.
Okay, so I'm sure there is some sort of academic answer to this, and I'm going to fail that test. So for me, a story, so there is I forget, there's actually a name for this pattern of writing a story, but like the story usually goes as a so-and-so, like a persona of a user, as a so-and-so, I need to, or I want to do such and such in order to do such and such. And so it'll typically be like, I need a feature or I need to solve a problem. And then the in order to is more like the outcome that you're trying to create. So it might be something like if you're familiar with Jira or some other sort of like project management system, you might say like, I need as a project manager, I need a way to rank stories or to rank features inside of my project in order to, what would be the in order to for that one, in order to make sure that we're working on things in the achieve our product goals and make sure we're working on things in the right order or something along those lines. I'm making this up. I put probably more effort into writing stories than the average person. One thing that I liked from actually a story writing book was talking about story as like, think of it as a caption from like a vacation, I think was how they framed it. And so it's like the caption from the vacation on like a picture doesn't tell the entire story of what's in that picture, but like you get together with your engineering team, you talk through the story that you wrote there, and then you talk through lots of like what ifs and could this be solved in this way, or they're trying to like feel their way around the requirement that you wrote. And so think of it as like they're sort of like asking you more about your vacation, to go back to that analogy, and like what was going on before and after this picture and how'd you feel about it and all these things that they might ask you, but what they remember later on when they're looking back on solving this problem is the caption that you wrote at the bottom of the picture. Your goal isn't to write down everything that you experienced that's in that picture. Your goal is just to sort of write the caption and then talk through it. And I'm not pedantic about writing stories, so I don't write them all the time with as a so-and-so, I need to do so-and-so in order to do such and such, right? I don't write them necessarily that way all the time. I try to. I think it's important, obviously, to relate to the customer and what they're ultimately trying to accomplish. But sometimes you can get really lost in trying to make sure that you've done that part right. And I think you just lose sight of the bigger problem or the bigger picture. And so for me, it's like you're just talking about a requirement. And then I want to have a conversation with the engineering team to make sure we're on the same page about what I'm asking for here. And for me, and I think this is also a little bit atypical, making sure that we're on the same page is a collaborative exercise where we write acceptance criteria together. So acceptance criteria is like usually just like a few bullet points on a story to say like a solution that would be acceptable for this problem would, include would be this or that or the other thing. It would be like some criteria. And the way that I look at it is I wrote the acceptance criteria. However the engineering team solves the problem, as long as they check those boxes, I have to like accept it, right? Otherwise, I need to get better at writing acceptance criteria. If I end up getting what I don't like back in return for the acceptance criteria that I wrote, then like we need to get better at writing acceptance criteria. But I use it also as a measure of making sure that we understand what the requirement is. And so we work on these things together. I might start a couple of bullets of acceptance criteria, but then we'll work on them together to make sure that we're on the same page with what I'm asking to be solved.
I see. So it is a way to define or evoke the requirement
Yes.
that the customer base has, not just one customer probably. And within it, the acceptance criteria are a way to basically have a metric on whether or not this was met.
Yeah, another way to look at acceptance criteria is like what does done look like, right? And so like how far do we want to take the story? Sometimes when we're coming up with acceptance criteria, I'll also ask like what's an example of taking it too far? Because like sometimes you'll end up like with engineers that are unclear on like how far they should solve the problem, they'll take it way too far. And it's like I didn't necessarily mean for it to be solved that to the nth degree. And so like, it's good to like talk about the boundaries of really what does done look like. So that'll be another kind of one of the questions that I talk about when we do acceptance criteria.
We spent 400 hours, engineering hours, getting this report to run in 13 seconds instead of 30 seconds. And you're like, well, as long as it finished in 2 minutes, that was really what I needed. So
right. There's stuff like that, yeah.
I feel like acceptance criteria is analogous to job description. And the hiring manager, you write the job description with somebody so that you're in alignment. And you just want them to solve that problem, so they're in charge of hiring. That's exactly immediately what I thought of when you started talking about this.
That's a pretty interesting analogy. For me, a lot of the reason also that I do acceptance criteria collaboratively is like sometimes you'll write a requirement and you'll put some meat on the bone. You'll put some acceptance criteria in there. You put maybe a paragraph, and you'll go in there and you'll talk about it, and you'll just get like a lot of nods. And because they're not really thinking about how they might solve the problem or what is an acceptable solution to the problem. They're not really thinking about that yet. And so they're sort of like nodding at you, and then they'll be like, okay. And then they'll point it or whatever the next part of the ceremony is. And then we'll move on. And then like 2 weeks later, 6 months later, whenever they're actually implementing this thing, then it's like, what does this mean? And because like nobody was really in agreement of what we were asking for at the time. And so I think it's important to be collaborative. I do think that it takes too long. Like I need to work on that. Like this is my own self-criticism. I like getting faster at writing acceptance criteria or refining stories with a group is something to get better at. But I do think that it does quickly get alignment on what is the problem we're trying to solve.
Thought it was quite interesting to hear how some of David's role changes were a result of him being a company man almost to a fault. He did the things that the company needed him to do, and in doing that, he got to look at things in a different way, pursue some new challenges that maybe he wouldn't have otherwise pursued, and he got to find out the types of things that he really liked and some things that he really didn't enjoy. My favorite point was the one that he made about if you're going to make these changes, you shouldn't take a role and get stuck there. It is okay to go back to individual contributor if you pursue the management path. And I think that is a stereotype that we're trying to break for people. If you go toward management today, does that mean you must always be a manager? And if you're an individual contributor today, must you always be an individual contributor?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think maybe goes back to one of the things that David talked about in part 1, episode 195, about the power of working at a startup, where maybe that kind of movement is a lot less awkward. And because everybody has so many hats, it's a lot easier to say, hey, I want to take off this hat and hand it off to somebody else. Or we need somebody else to come in and wear this hat. It just was really interesting, I think, to get yet another perspective on that. Hey, if this isn't the right thing for you, don't hesitate to take a step in the other direction. Do the job that you actually want to do, not the one that, the company needs you to do, maybe after you figured out that is the case.
I feel like this is somewhat tangential, John, to how a generalist might become a specialist.
Yeah, that's another good point. Or you could say it's another role in the generalist toolbox where you do a little bit of everything have some experience in a bunch of different things. And then, later on, when you decide that you need to specialize, you have some skills from across the spectrum.
Speaking of skills, you definitely need some specific skills to be a player coach, because you have to be a player and a coach. I just wonder if that model sometimes, depending on where you are, is doomed for failure because of the split in responsibilities of what you have to do. I definitely admired David's honesty when he reflected back on, I think I could have done better. And I wasn't extremely interested in management at the time. And because of that, I didn't put an extreme amount of effort into it.
It's a really good point. I think that in that situation, maybe, again, in a startup or in a smaller organization, there's a little bit more of an ability to have somebody who's doing some individual contributor work also be the manager of the team. If that person is backing up somebody who's on vacation or has small projects that they own, or they're taking on, specific tasks out of the backlog to work on and be the primary developer on. But the larger the organization, I think the more quote unquote doomed to fail that is. A manager is a full-time position. So to add on top of the job of managing to also do individual contributor work is really, really difficult. It's an overload.
Yeah, and maybe at some companies that gap is filled by a technical lead.
Exactly, yeah.
Who can go back and forth, and maybe there's a percentage of time that's allocated for each one. We didn't get all the details of that, but I imagine it was a little bit less clear at a startup of how much time to spend on which.
Yes. And I think probably at larger organizations, you can start to see, as you pointed out, tech leads or, a senior engineering role, or a staff engineering role, or a principal might be the one who's taking on some of those larger, overarching, product-defining, directional stuff. And it's somebody's specific job to do some of those things, and not the job of the manager to also come in and set the development tone and development direction. Now that I think about it, the definitions of user stories and acceptance criteria in relationship to the engineering world, the software engineering world, I found fascinating. These are phrases that I've heard and I've seen examples of, but I never really got that formal definition or discussion of what they are exactly and why they're important. It just seems to me that both of these things should be part of the toolkit that sales engineering people use. When we are prospecting, we should have user stories for the products that we're representing in mind. Who are the roles that we're targeting? Why would they benefit? And then what is that outcome? Just that idea in and of itself I found very powerful, and I started thinking about that and applying that concept in my own work. Just found that really cool. And then acceptance criteria, very close to what we use in proof of concepts. I think maybe a little bit more formalized. It's a slightly different take on acceptance criteria, but just that rigorous definition so you're not spending too much time on things that don't matter, making sure that you have metrics, like what the granularity of them are, and then have really good back and forth discussions so everybody's on the same page about them. Very powerful. I think we do a variation of that, but understanding other people's use of that phrase and what it means, I think is very powerful. And maybe we start to pull some of that over.
And you know what? I'm thinking that podcasters could use user stories and acceptance criteria to write things like their intros and outros. Have you heard that?
Oh, that would be really interesting. I feel like it's a little bit more like a stand-up meeting and maybe a retrospective. But, now that I say that, those are part of the Agile ceremonies, and I don't think that we've gotten a definition of what those are. Maybe we'll get those in part 3? What do you think?
I'm hopeful.
Yeah. In order to actually find out whether or not we do, tune in for part 3 next week.
Hey, John, with part 3 on tap, I think that's all we had to talk about. Anything else pop into your mind before we get out of here?
Nope, that's about it. Just a reminder again that we'd like people to subscribe and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to be listening. We want to know if we're being helpful and are always looking for interesting questions to ponder. We're collectively on Twitter @NerdJourney.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm Nick Cordy @NetworkNerd_, for John White @BJourneyman, signing off.
Adios.
Just a reminder, we want people to subscribe and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. We want to know if we're being helpful and are always looking for interesting questions to ponder and ceremonies to take part in. We're collectively on Twitter @NerdJourney.
Awesome. Does that mean I'm doing the closing?
Oh, wow. I guess so.
Okay.
I just went straight to it. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right.
Ah!
All right. Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm Nick Cordy. I'm not Nick Cordy.
Do you want me to rewind back and just start over to make this consistent and easy?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.